If this reflection on the terror of radical change, the sudden, violent necessity of abandoning the person you spent a lifetime building, resonates with the anxiety of transition in your own heart, I ask you to do one small, necessary thing before we proceed further. Share this reflection on purpose and new identity with one person you know who is currently searching for their path after a major life upheaval. They call me the Apostle now, the rock of doctrine, the one who possesses the unshakable conviction necessary to write scriptures that endure beyond empires. But I tell you, I was once Saulo of Tarsus, and that man was the ultimate masterpiece of human certainty and ambition. I was the far side of perfection, the meticulous student trained at the feet of Gamaliel, the brilliant Pharisee who had the entire future of influence, power, and social status clearly mapped out by my own ferocious intellect and unwavering zeal. Then came the road to Damascus, and the brutal, humiliating truth. The glorious conversion the world celebrates was, for me, a violent, catastrophic identity death. It was not merely a bright light to guide me. It was a psychological annihilation that robbed me of everything: my career, my religious authority, my social standing, my entire intellectual framework, and the fundamental certainty of my own sight. The terrifying moment was not seeing the light. It was realizing with horrifying clarity that I had to completely burn the perfect, powerful man I was, Saulo, to give birth to the broken, vulnerable, and deeply uncertain man named Paul. My crisis was, and remains, an acute, unrelenting sense of existential displacement that haunts my waking hours. I was once the quintessential man of two worlds, possessing the absolute privileges of Roman citizenship and the unquestionable authority of a zealous Jew. Yet after Damascus, I became a man of literally no world at all. My former peers, the powerful Pharisees, immediately branded me a traitor, a dangerous heretic, a fool who threw away a life of guaranteed power and honor for the madness of following a recently crucified carpenter. Simultaneously, the new group, the early followers of Christ, viewed me with absolute, justifiable suspicion, constantly seeing the ruthless persecutor hidden beneath the thin, precarious veneer of the newfound convert. I was trapped in a terrifying vacuum, a highly educated man who had lost his native intellectual tongue and had not yet fully mastered the language of his new home, leaving me feeling like an eternal, unwelcome foreigner in my own skin and my new, undefined mission. The profound exhaustion of this sustained transition stemmed directly from the endless, quiet fear of being exposed as an imposter. I was constantly driven by a frantic, desperate need to prove my unexpected worthiness to a skeptical world, and more importantly, to my own relentlessly judging conscience. I preached and wrote with a fervent, almost desperate intensity, not just for the sake of the gospel, but subconsciously to drown out the internal whisper that asked, "Did you throw away a guaranteed life of status and power for an elaborate, self-deluding illusion? Are you truly worthy to speak for the very movement you once sought so violently to destroy?" This crippling anxiety fueled my frantic pace, the endless, dangerous journeys, the monumental, ceaseless output of letters, all of it designed in part to create enough undeniable evidence of my new identity before the ghost of Saulo could finally drag me back to the public judgment I truly deserved. The core challenge of the midlife transition, regardless of whether its catalyst is spiritual or professional, is rooted in the unbearable loss of status and known competence. I, who was trained at the feet of Gamaliel, the unchallenged master debater and intellectual titan, was now reduced to depending on the uncertain charity and hospitality of strangers, often forced to take up manual labor and perpetually facing ridicule and public beatings. The profound pride of Saulo, the fierce pride that came from possessing an unquestionable academic and social rank, died a slow, agonizing death. This public and internal humiliation was the true staggering price of my transformation. You who have changed careers radically in your later years, sacrificing a powerful title for a simple, uncertain mission, you know the crushing weight of that sudden loss of competence and the internal struggle to find value in vulnerability rather than established, quantifiable authority. My profound confusion was compounded by the intense, isolating solitude of my spiritual quarantine. Immediately after the vision, I spent 3 years retreating into the Arabian desert, a period of unstructured emptiness that was mentally devastating. I, the man who thrived on rigid academic schedules, precise logical argumentation, and clear legal directives, was left with nothing but silence and the terrifying ambiguity of an undefined, dangerous future. The world expected the zealous convert to immediately take the stage. Instead, I was in a profound spiritual quarantine, forced to systematically dismantle every logical, intellectual, and professional defense I had meticulously built over 40 years. This intense solitude was a necessary spiritual surgery, but it was brutal. It was the only way to ensure that the foundation of the new identity was built not on the crumbling rubble of Saulo's flawless learning, but on the unearned, terrifyingly simple grace received in that blinding, chaotic moment. The fundamental crisis of my new existence was the ever-present fear of perpetual public judgment. I knew my past sins were vast, public, and undeniably visible. Every time I preached in a new city, I faced the possibility of immediate stoning, imprisonment, or assassination, not just from the Roman authorities, but from my own former powerful colleagues. This sustained, high-level anxiety defined my early purpose. I was forced to live with the knowledge that the world would never entirely trust me, and that my life was perpetually precarious and contingent upon the unpredictable moods of my audience. This feeling, the crushing anxiety of the perpetually scrutinized, the one who must constantly prove they are not the villain they once were, is the profound mental crisis of anyone who undergoes a radical conversion of any kind. It demands a level of internal fortitude that only comes from abandoning all remaining hope in conditional human approval. This deep, transformative struggle, the fight to reconcile the powerful man who was with the vulnerable, entirely dependent man who is the key to unlocking purpose in transition. Do not let the judgment of your former self or the skepticism of your former peers paralyze your second act. Your strength is not found in denying the pain of the past, but in leveraging the undeniable truth of your scars. I promise you, the moment I finally broke my cycle of desperate self-justification, the profound quiet moment that allowed my true, simple identity to surface, is revealed in the necessary, painful humility of my complete surrender. To ensure you receive the final, liberating truth about finding identity in vulnerability, and to prepare for the profound confrontation that shattered my ego, please hit the notification bell now and activate the reminders for the next critical step in my journey. The deepest crisis of my unexpected second life was not the blindness or the persecution. It was the profound absence of a map. Saulo had possessed a life of meticulous blueprints: education, advancement, political maneuvering, and clear religious hierarchy. Paul, the newly chosen vessel, was thrust into 3 years of unscripted silence in the Arabian desert, an existence defined by terrifying ambiguity and the total lack of structure. This was the ultimate collapse of my internal temple. I, the man whose entire self-worth was rooted in competence and logic, was forced to live without any reference points, unable to argue or debate my way to clarity. This vacuum of purpose, this existential void, was the mental battleground where the ghost of Saulo fought Paul for survival. The monotony of the desert amplified the relentless anxiety. What if the light was just a fever dream? What if I am just a highly educated madman who destroyed a guaranteed future for a pathetic illusion? This devastating loss of professional and intellectual competence was the source of my deepest silent humiliation. I had been a master, a scholar capable of citing volumes of scripture and dissecting legal codes with surgical precision. Now my task was to simply wait and to unlearn everything that had given me status. The intellect that was my shield and my weapon suddenly became irrelevant, and that felt like a spiritual demotion, a stripping away of my very essence. I was forced to confront the terrible reality that my previous identity, built upon the foundation of my brilliant works and my fierce zeal, was fundamentally opposed to the new identity, which was to be built solely upon unearned grace. The dismantling of Saulo's pride was slow, painful, and often felt like descending into a state of profound intellectual and spiritual depression, realizing that the knowledge I prided myself on was actually a barrier to truth. My retreat to the Arabian desert, a period rarely discussed in the sermons, was a necessary spiritual quarantine, but it was psychologically brutal. It was the forced solitude that many of you face in the sudden quiet of retirement, or the loneliness that follows a major familial split. I had no peers to validate my experience, no teachers to guide my doctrine, and no immediate mission to distract me from the sheer weight of my past. I was imprisoned by my own mind, constantly replaying the screams of the faithful I had persecuted, and perpetually questioning the legitimacy of my own transformation. The emptiness of those 3 years was a deliberate strategy by the divine to empty my vessel of all Saulo's self-reliance, forcing me to recognize that the power of my new life would flow from a source entirely external to my own depleted resources and shattered reputation. The primary crisis of meaning was the realization that my zeal, which I believed was serving God, was actually serving my own ambition and cruelty. I had mistaken violence for virtue and intellectual dominance for divine authority. The trauma of the blindness was followed by the profound, paralyzing question: if I was so utterly wrong about the direction of my entire adult life, how can I trust my judgment now? This doubt crippled my will to move forward, leading to a deep anxiety about purpose. I had no map, only the vague, terrifying command: go, for you are my chosen instrument. But who was this instrument now? A man rejected by his own people and distrusted by the people he was supposed to lead. I was an eternal outsider, burdened by a mission that felt too grand and a past that was too vile. This prolonged state of anxiety and unscripted emptiness is the universal crisis of transition. You too may find yourself staring at an unfamiliar future, feeling the crushing weight of having abandoned the successful life and fearing that the new path is only an illusion of hope. I was so accustomed to achieving through force that the mandate to simply receive truth in quiet contemplation was excruciating. My identity had collapsed, and I was left with the residue of my own monumental failures. The former life, with its clear rules and defined hierarchies, was a tempting siren song back to certainty. The temptation to return to the known world of Saulo, to exchange the terror of freedom for the comfort of familiar condemnation, was immense and persistent. The only thing that kept me from fully collapsing into despair was the sheer, stubborn, illogical memory of the light and the voice. It wasn't the intellectual content of my new faith that sustained me in the desert, but the unmistakable reality of the personal encounter. It was the raw, undeniable force that had physically and spiritually broken me. I had to choose every day to trust the event of the vision over the logic of the marketplace. This constant internal friction, the intellectual giant wrestling with the spiritual infant, defined those barren years. I had to learn that the purpose of my suffering was to dismantle my intellectual pride so that my future faith could be built on a simpler, more vulnerable, and utterly unearned foundation. My friends, if you recognize this struggle, the paralyzing fear of the unknown, the crippling anxiety of losing your competence and status in a radical transition, then you must stay with me. The desert of the soul is a place of necessary dismantling, but it is not your final home. Do not let the terror of the void drive you back to the comfortable yet deadly certainty of your past. Do not click away now, the moment of ultimate surrender, where I finally find a new, unshakable identity in my vulnerability, is the life-altering truth you need to hear. The most subtle and persistent deception I maintained after Damascus was the mask of the fierce apostle, the man whose confidence was so total, whose arguments were so razor-sharp, and whose passion was so consuming that no one dared to question his sincerity. I confess that much of the raw, undeniable intensity in my early preaching and in my letters was not purely divine inspiration. It was a psychological defense mechanism, a compensation for the overwhelming fear that I was a fraud, a deeply unworthy successor to the very men I had persecuted. My powerful rhetorical style, the very thing that allowed me to command attention, was, in reality, a shield against scrutiny. The aggressive, uncompromising nature of my arguments served to keep both my external enemies and my internal accuser, the relentless ghost of Saulo, at a safe, critical distance. This performance required an unsustainable level of energy, and the price of maintaining that unyielding confidence was the suppression of the vulnerable, terrified man who desperately feared being sent back to his old life. The true corruption of my identity lay in the fact that I was actively weaponizing my own guilt as a form of performance. My furious zeal for the new mission, my willingness to endure beatings, shipwrecks, and public stoning, was often a veiled, desperate attempt to pay off the unpayable debt of my past life as a persecutor. I unconsciously believed that the more I suffered, the more evidence I collected of my genuine conversion, the more worthy I would become of the grace I had received. This constant need for self-justification led to a profound internal dishonesty. I was trying to earn the pardon that was freely given, turning the gift of redemption into a relentless, self-inflicted marathon of penance. You who are in your maturity, who overcompensate for past errors with obsessive work or hyper-competence, understand this betrayal. We use frantic performance as a way to avoid the quiet, agonizing work of simple, humble self-acceptance. I confess that, deep within the solitude of my thoughts, I still harbored a dangerous resentment toward the loss of my former status. Saulo was a name that commanded fear, respect, and instant authority within the circles of power. Paul, the tent-maker, was a vagrant, a criminal, a perpetually suspected outsider. Even as I preached the gospel of humility, the sophisticated scholar in me missed the intellectual validation of the Pharisaic academy. This secret mourning for the power and status of Saulo became the subtle pressure point in my soul. I used the harshness of my moral judgment towards others as a way to reaffirm my own righteousness, desperately trying to prove that the immense sacrifice of Saulo's powerful career had been worth the poverty and persecution of Paul's mission. My greatest mistake in this transition was the initial rejection of authentic connection with the original apostles. When I first returned, instead of seeking their counsel and humbly accepting their initial distrust, I retreated into my own intellectual fortress, preferring the solitary study of the desert. This isolation, born of pride and fear of rejection, delayed my healing. I secretly believed I was intellectually superior to them. After all, I was the one who studied under Gamaliel, and therefore I did not need their affirmation. This arrogance, the last stubborn residue of Saulo's pride, forced me into a temporary wilderness of loneliness, confirming that the spiritual conversion had been instant, but the psychological maturity required years of painful, internal dismantling of my intellectual ego. The profound connection here is for those who navigate radical midlife changes. When you shift careers, faith systems, or relationships, you desperately cling to the metrics of your old identity to validate your new one. You seek to prove your new commitment, using the tools of your old ambition, which inevitably leads to exhaustion and hypocrisy. I learned that the aggressive drive that made me a successful persecutor was incompatible with the patient, gentle authority required to build the church. I had to fundamentally redefine what power meant, accepting that the truest strength was not found in debating logic, but in enduring vulnerability, the very trait Saulo despised. The cost of my mask was felt physically and emotionally. The ceaseless journeying, the beatings, the constant anxiety of proving my worth were all symptoms of a soul that had not yet found rest in grace. I was trading my life for validation, a transaction that always leads to spiritual bankruptcy. It was only when I began to accept my frailty, my ongoing physical struggles, my dependence on others like Timothy and Barnabas, that the aggressive mask began to soften, allowing the genuine authority of the apostle to shine through, an authority rooted in shared suffering, not singular achievement. This powerful realization that the aggressive mask of perfection is a self-imposed prison is the key to unlocking the true peace of your later years. If you recognize the cost of your own intense striving and are ready to trade the exhausting pursuit of validation for the profound dignity of self-acceptance, I urge you to join this authentic journey. Find the comments section and with radical honesty, write down the one Saulo habit you are ready to dismantle today, e.g., overworking, controlling, debating. Let us commit to this act of liberation together. My ultimate dark night of the soul was not the beatings, the shipwrecks, or the isolation in the desert. It was the terrifying absolute loss of my sight on the road to Damascus. That blinding light did more than just reveal a truth about the Nazarene. It brutally stripped away the single most foundational pillar of Saulo's identity, his ability to perceive, assess, and control his environment through superior intellect and vision. For 3 days I was plunged into total darkness, utterly dependent on the guidance of men I despised and distrusted. The man who prided himself on sight, clarity, and legal foresight was reduced to a stumbling, helpless invalid. This enforced stillness, this terrifying, profound vacuum of control, was the necessary trauma that finally broke the suffocating resistance of my ego. I was forced to face the truth that my life could no longer be ruled by the brilliance of my mind, but only by the grace I was now incapable of earning or even seeing. The profound power of that sensory deprivation was the relentless exposure of my inadequacy. In the darkness, the only thing that remained vivid were the internal screams, the terrified cries of the early followers I had persecuted, and the crushing voice of the internal accuser demanding to know what I had done with my sight. I couldn't debate the darkness. I couldn't argue with the blindness. The total loss of my most cherished competence, my intellectual perception, forced me into a state of absolute, terrifying humility. I was completely reliant on a stranger, a humble man named Ananias, to touch me and restore my vision. This was the moment I stopped trying to earn my mission and was forced to simply receive the next step from an unexpected, non-intellectual source. My spiritual awakening required the total annihilation of my pride, proving that my strength was merely a destructive illusion. The turning point was the forced confrontation with dependence. Saulo's motto was autonomy and power. Paul's baptism was an act of complete, childlike submission. When Ananias laid his hands on me, the true breakthrough was not the return of my physical sight, that was merely the sign, but the internal acceptance of my profound weakness. I finally realized that my mission would not be based on my own powerful rhetoric or legal mastery, but on the unshakable testimony of my failure and my dependence. The ultimate surrender was accepting that I would be perpetually dependent on a power that manifested most clearly in my frailty. This was the healing of my midlife crisis, understanding that my true worth and my enduring purpose would be found not in my achievements, but in the vulnerability I had spent a lifetime running from. This radical acceptance of my inherent weakness became the core of my new identity. I stopped mourning the loss of Saulo's flawless power and began to embrace the unique authority of Paul's profound brokenness. My suffering, the physical discomfort, the constant threats, the thorn in the flesh, were not divine punishments but necessary reminders that the power rested in the clay jar, not in the perfection of the vessel. This is the liberation that awaits the mature soul, recognizing that the very limitations you despise, the aging body, the financial failure, the public humiliation, are the precise contexts in which true, unearned strength manifests most powerfully. I stopped seeing my persecution as a curse and started seeing it as the painful public validation of my authentic dependence on grace. I discovered that the language of the kingdom was not the complex Greek rhetoric I had mastered, but the simple, unadorned language of shared suffering. I stopped attempting to craft the perfect, flawless argument and started speaking from the raw, exposed place of my personal public failure. This vulnerability, the courage to acknowledge the persecutor still living within the apostle, was the true source of my authority. It was the moment I finally broke the cycle of hypocrisy and exchanged the mask of invincibility for the face of authentic, humble humanity. The power of my teaching came not from the brilliance of my mind, but from the simple, honest testimony that transformation is terrifying, painful, and absolutely possible for the worst of sinners. The purpose of that traumatic darkness was to teach me the profound difference between knowledge and intimacy. Saulo possessed all the knowledge, but Paul possessed the personal, intimate relationship forged in dependence and surrender. I had to be blinded to truly see. This is the truth that guides your own crisis of transition, the uncertainty, the fear of the unknown, the loss of your old reference points. This is the necessary darkness that forces your intellect to surrender to the simple, profound truth of your new life's direction. Stop demanding that the path be logical, and start accepting that your purpose is based on the quiet, relational certainty that transcends human calculation. If you are currently struggling through your own blinding moment, if the map of your life has disappeared and you feel utterly directionless and dependent, know that you are at the precipice of your most profound breakthrough. The solution to your anxiety is not found in regaining control, but in embracing the dependence. I urge you to take this moment to confront the specific source of your current weakness, financial, emotional, physical, and accept it as the context for your new strength. Close your eyes for 1 minute and whisper a word of surrender. Commit to making peace with your weakness, and join me in the final, most glorious act of transforming shame into purpose. The truth that finally emerged from the shattered remnants of my pride was the ultimate non-heroic, yet fundamentally liberating realization. My purpose was never meant to be about achieving intellectual dominance or earning redemption through relentless suffering. It was about demonstrating the radical, transformative power of unearned grace. I had spent my first life as Saulo, building a colossal identity based on flawless human merit, and my subsequent years trying desperately to replicate that merit in a new spiritual sphere. But the true, stunning insight that defined my maturity was that my greatest contribution to the world was not my scholarship or my ceaseless work, but the simple, undeniable fact that I, the chief of sinners, was radically forgiven and used despite my profound unworthiness. My new identity was a gift, not a conquest. This revelation completely redefined the metrics of my purpose. I stopped measuring my worth by the number of churches I planted or the brilliance of my arguments, the metrics of Saulo. Instead, I began to measure my significance by the depth of my vulnerability and the magnitude of the grace I was willing to display. My purpose shifted from being a powerful doer to becoming a transparent vessel. The world needed to see the persecutor redeemed, the intellectual humbled, the aggressive man made patient. This non-heroic calling, the willingness to be the living, breathing proof that transformation is possible for the most corrupted, became the unwavering anchor of my second act. I realized my suffering, my shame, and my initial arrogance were not obstacles to my purpose. They were the essential, painful preconditions for my unique testimony. The greatest psychological hurdle I had to overcome was the urge to hide the thorn in the flesh, my physical ailment, my lingering anxieties, the very things that kept me dependent. I prayed 3 times for the removal of this affliction, believing it compromised my apostolic authority and my image of perfection. But the profound, liberating answer I received was, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." That sentence was the final, devastating blow to Saulo's pride and the ultimate birth of Paul's true purpose. It taught me that my greatest strength was not in being healed, but in being broken, and then unapologetically relying on a strength that was entirely not my own. This acceptance of perpetual unhealed weakness became the foundational philosophy of my maturity. I stopped viewing my afflictions and limitations as signs of spiritual failure and started embracing them as the unique, painful channels through which genuine divine power flowed. My authority was no longer derived from my academic credentials or my physical endurance. It was derived from my authentic brokenness. This is the vital lesson for the mature soul. Stop wasting energy on the futile quest for flawless invincibility. Your current limitations, the aging body, the emotional scars, the career that ended prematurely, are not setbacks. They are the essential, painful context that will validate your message of hope and teach you to find power in profound humility. My entire approach to life shifted from striving to resting. I realized that the incessant travel, the tireless writing, and the relentless preaching, while essential, had often been fueled by Saulo's residual anxious drive to prove his worth. Now my work flowed from a place of acceptance, a quiet confidence in the unearned grace that defined me. The constant anxiety of the transition dissolved when I truly committed to the non-heroic purpose, to transform my history of persecution and chaos into a disciplined, intentional ministry of reconciliation. The purpose of my latter years was to anchor the volatile, spectacular memory of my past in the calm, unshakable certainty of my present conversion. This discovery is the map out of the crisis for you, the one grappling with a profound change in your life's direction. Your purpose in maturity is not to build a new life entirely free of the past's shadow, but to courageously leverage that shadow as the background for your light. Stop trying to silence the ghost of your past identity. Instead, let your vulnerability become your new authority. Your worth is established not by what you achieve next, but by the quiet power with which you accept your own brokenness and the unearned grace that sustains you day after day. This is the enduring strength of the apostle, forged in the terror of the transition. I urge you to embrace the painful truth of your unique frailty, your thorn in the flesh, and allow it to become the context for your new powerful purpose. Your life is not about eliminating the weakness. It is about finding power in its presence. To internalize this radical shift from striving to resting, I ask you to join me in this vulnerability. Take a moment now to comment below with the one physical or emotional thorn you are choosing to accept as the source of your strength today. If you are standing on the precipice of a radical life change, if the light of your new purpose feels blinding and the ground beneath your old status is crumbling, then this is the practical map for resilience I offer, forged in the terror of Damascus and the silence of the desert. The single most vital step toward successful transition is the deliberate act of burning the old map's metrics. You cannot build the new life of Paul using the tools, the ambition, or the yardstick of Saulo. That means stopping the comparison. Stop measuring your current value by the prestige of your former title, the size of your old income, or the complexity of the roles you once held. The new life requires a completely new vocabulary for success, one built on the simple, non-quantifiable values of integrity, vulnerability, and sustained faith. Your current exhaustion is merely the friction between the old ambitious self that demands performance and the new humble self that seeks peace in presence. Secondly, you must address the core anxiety of judgment and social isolation by actively seeking a new community that validates your present journey, not your past status. I was rejected by the Pharisees for abandoning their cause and mistrusted by the apostles for my history of persecution. This loneliness was brutal, but it forced me to build relationships on the bedrock of shared vulnerability and mutual mission rather than on the shifting sands of political or intellectual alliance. You, too, must accept that your radical transition will inevitably cost you relationships rooted in your former identity. The map requires you to cultivate new relationships based on authenticity, people who celebrate the broken, evolving person you are, not the perfect, rigid version you were. The strength of your second act is directly proportional to the courage you show in leaving behind those who cling to your old, obsolete narrative. The ultimate wisdom of transition is recognizing that your most profound strength lies in the very weakness you have been trying to conceal. I spent my life striving to master every argument, but my most powerful sermon is the simple, honest testimony of my physical pain and my dependence on grace. Your suffering, your thorn in the flesh, whether it is a chronic anxiety, a physical ailment, or a financial setback, is not a sign of failure. It is the unique context through which your purpose will manifest most clearly. The map requires you to trade the pursuit of invincibility for the acceptance of profound humanity. This acceptance liberates you from the exhausting need to control every outcome, allowing the true, unearned power of resilience to flow through your admitted frailty. This is the non-negotiable principle for building your new purpose. You must anchor your identity not in what you do, but in what you accept. Saulo was defined by his tireless work of persecution. Paul is defined by the grace he received despite his tireless persecution. Your maturity demands that you stop allowing your identity to be contingent upon your accomplishments, and instead, root it firmly in the profound, simple truth of your worth as a human being, a worth that cannot be earned, lost, or compromised by external events. The path to lasting purpose is through humble acceptance, not through renewed, frantic performance. The practical necessity of recomeço requires the development of a new language. Saulo spoke the language of law, merit, and condemnation. Paul spoke the language of grace, love, and redemption. If you are struggling in your new phase, examine the words you use to define yourself. Are you still using the critical, harsh vocabulary of your past life to judge your new endeavors? You must consciously unlearn the language of your former status and replace it with the vocabulary of your current vulnerability and hope. This is the hard work of spiritual reconstruction, creating an internal environment where your new fragile identity can safely take root and flourish without being immediately judged by the harsh, obsolete standards of the person you used to be. The map is clear. The purpose of your remaining years is to use your personal narrative of radical transition as a beacon of possibility. Your life is now the tangible proof that transformation is possible, even for those who made monumental, seemingly unforgivable mistakes. Your greatest legacy is not what you complete, but the courage you model for others trapped in their own debilitating sense of too late. Stop clinging to the wreckage of the past and embrace the terrifying freedom of the present. Your power is found in the simple, honest act of living your radically new purpose, accepting the inevitable judgment of the old world as proof that you are finally walking the path that is authentically yours. To sustain this courageous journey, you must commit to sharing this map with others. Your story is too valuable to keep confined. I urge you to use your voice to affirm your new identity and help those struggling with transition. Find the comment section and use the reply button to offer a word of encouragement to a person who shared their vulnerability in the previous chapters. Let us build a legacy of mutual support, turning shared fragility into collective strength. The final completion of my journey, my personal race against the ghost of Saulo, was not a dramatic, fiery ascent like my vision. It was the quiet, profound act of laying down the need to prove myself. I sit here now, near the end of my life, chained in this cold cell, and I confess that this physical confinement brings a psychological freedom I never experienced when I was free, powerful, and driven by my own ambition. My ultimate peace is rooted in the complete acceptance of my current limitations, my physical frailty, and the unrelenting persecution. I realized that the true victory of my second act was not in being the relentless builder of the church, but in being the humble, broken vessel who finally stopped confusing his own strength with the power of grace. The great anxiety of the transition dissolved when I truly understood that my identity was secured by the love that found me in the darkness, not by the status I achieved in the light. I implore you to understand this core truth. The anxiety of your midlife transition, the fear of losing your old status, is a gift disguised as a crisis. It is the necessary trauma that forces the death of the self-reliant, arrogant person who needed control to feel worthy. Stop fighting the inevitable loss of your old identity. Your purpose is now to become the powerful, visible testament to the fact that true significance is found in dependence, not in self-sufficiency. The world needs to see the success story who had to start over in humility, the confident leader who had to admit fear, the brilliant mind who had to submit to simple faith. Your willingness to stand in your frailty, claiming strength despite your weakness, is the most profound lesson you can impart to a generation paralyzed by the fear of falling from grace. My life's final purpose was not to write more doctrine, but to model the transformation from condemnation to celebration. I finally stopped judging myself by the perfectionist metrics of the Pharisees and began to live by the liberating metrics of the gospel. Joy in suffering, power in weakness, and peace in dependence. Your new dawn requires the same radical shift. You must consciously choose to define your worth not by the career you finished or the relationships you lost, but by the courage you demonstrate in embracing the unknown. The fear of being an eternal foreigner, a man without a country, is healed by the simple acceptance that your true citizenship, your true identity, is secured by something far greater and more eternal than any title or any territory you once possessed. The greatest struggle of my latter years was making peace with the thorn in the flesh, my constant physical reminder of my dependence. I learned to be content in weakness, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, and in difficulties. This acceptance was the key to unlocking my final purpose. I no longer view my suffering as a failure. I view it as a guarantee that the power flowing through me is entirely unearned. This is the profound resolution for the aging, anxious soul. Your physical or emotional decline is not a sign of defeat, but an urgent invitation to find your sustainable power in humility. Embrace your current limitation as the unique context for your greatest strength, realizing that your true authority is established in your vulnerability, not in your vanished vigor. I charge you to break the final, subtle chains of your past. Stop allowing the ghost of your old powerful status to haunt your present opportunities. The wisdom of maturity is understanding that the true joy of the second act is found in letting go of the audience's applause and embracing the quiet, profound reward of authentic service. Your life is a powerful, ongoing narrative of redemption, a testament that no failure is too great, and no transition is too terrifying to navigate when your identity is rooted in the constant, unchanging nature of grace. Your greatest legacy is not the perfection of your work, but the transparency of your transformation. This wisdom is meant to guide your own radical recomeço. Do not fear the loss of the familiar, fear the stagnation of the soul that refuses to change. Your purpose is to be the living proof that a new, unshakable identity can be forged in the fire of transition and the darkness of uncertainty. Your task is to turn the chaos of your past into the unwavering clarity of your purpose. To finalize this journey and affirm your commitment to this new, authentic identity, I ask you to make a final, visible act of embracing your purpose. Find your chosen social platform and share this video, writing one sentence about the new identity you are claiming today, even in your uncertainty. E.g., I am claiming the identity of the resilient guide. I am embracing my role as a humble mentor. Let us send this powerful message of transformation out to all those still hiding in their darkness. Closing phrase, profound and final. I thought I needed a new vision to find my purpose, but I needed the blindness. Your identity is not in what you conquer. It is in the radical grace you finally humbly accept.